I'm Paul and this is my computer build tutorial. So first things first, before I handle any of the sensitive components, I'm going to put on this anti-static wrist strap. It's supposed to help prevent electrostatic discharge when you're building the computer. I like to install everything I can onto the motherboard before I put it in the case just to make things a little easier. So I'm going to start with the RAM, also known as random access memory or just memory for short. I'm going to make sure I align the slots on the memory to the slots on the motherboard just to make sure everything's seated properly. The computer uses RAM to store short-term data that'll need to be accessed quickly. Since I unboxed the motherboard, I might as well install the I/O shield before I lose it. So it should pop in from the inside of the case with a fair bit of force. When you're installing the I/O shield, always double check to make sure it's not upside down. Moving back over to the motherboard, I'm going to carefully install the CPU, making sure not to damage any of the pins in the socket. There's a tiny arrow on the corner of the CPU as well as on the corner of the socket on the motherboard. You're going to want to make sure these are lined up when you seat the processor. I'm going to give the CPU a quick little wiggle to make sure it's where it needs to be, then it's as simple as locking it in with this arm. The CPU, also known as the central processing unit, is pretty much the brain of the computer and is responsible for telling all the other components what to do. Next, I'm going to install the heatsink. The heatsink removes heat from the CPU so it doesn't overheat and cause damage. This stock cooler is as simple as pushing in the pins on all four sides to lock it down. If you're using an aftermarket cooler without pre-applied thermal paste, make sure to use a pea-sized drop of it on the CPU before installing the cooler. Now that everything's installed onto the motherboard, we can drop it into the case. The case I was building in already had standoffs in it, but if yours doesn't, it should have them in a separate bag with a bunch of other screws. I'm going to find the right size screws for the motherboard and start fastening them down. The motherboard allows the CPU, memory, graphics card, and all other hardware to communicate with each other. It also has I/O for devices like speakers, mice, keyboard, displays, controllers, and much more. Some motherboards even come with built-in Wi-Fi. Up next is installing the storage. This is what's used to store the operating system and all your other files. I chose to go with the small capacity SSD for this video, but storage comes in a lot of different speeds and sizes. Again, it's as simple as finding the correct screws and mounting it wherever it goes on your specific case. Moving on to the power supply. The power supply takes AC power from the wall outlet and converts it into usable electricity to power the components. Installing it's also pretty simple, just find the right screws and screw it in. The trickier part is wiring. I'm not going to worry about cable management until I know the system will post, so it's going to be a little messy. All of the connectors are labeled and most only fit one way, so as long as you take your time and be patient, you'll be set. Connecting the front panel connectors can be a little tedious at times, so just take your time and refer back to the motherboard manual to make sure you have all the connectors plugged into the right spot. Now, saving the best for last, the graphics card. It plugs into the PCIe slot on the motherboard, and if your motherboard has more than one slot, always plug it into the very top one. The GPU or graphics card is used to process anything graphics related. A graphics card is commonly used in gaming computers or workstation computers that need a lot of graphical power. After you make sure the graphics card is fully seated and screwed in, plug in the PCIe power connectors from the power supply. Okay, so now we're ready to test and see if it posts. I'm going to plug in the computer, turn on the power supply, and connect the video output on the graphics card to a monitor. When you press the power button, you should see any fans or lights you have turn on. A few seconds later, you should be brought to the BIOS. And now for the final step, I'm going to install Windows. I'm installing it from a flash drive, but any removable media would work the same way. I just go through the setup process, accepting terms and choosing my version of Windows. When I get here, I format the new drive and select the primary partition to install Windows on. It'll take a while, but just let Windows do its thing, then you're pretty much done.